Hello and welcome to an introduction on the gene keys and how one can use them in their everyday life. Now, the gene keys is a transmission that English mystic and poet Richard Rudd channeled while he was in a heightened state of consciousness. Essentially, this is quite an expansive transmission that we can't necessarily fully comprehend or fully explain with the human language. However, Richard Rudd does an amazing job at doing this in his books. Hi dog. Put a dog over here. So essentially the gene keys are a set, 64 keys. Oh, doggo. 64 keys. Each of them you can think of like an essence or a quality. Now, we can use an example. Let's use gene key number 5 as an example. Now, gene key number 5 is the gift of patience. Patience. Now, that's at the gift level. Each gene key has 3 levels to it. There's a shadow frequency, a gift frequency, and a siddhic frequency. Now, siddhic frequency means like a very heightened state, almost we can say Buddhic level. So that's, that's super high. That's almost incomprehensible to the everyday person. And basically each essence, each key, we can be oscillating anywhere between these states. So there's not just 3, but to make it clearer, Richard Rudd describes each key within 3 states, but actually it's a spectrum, so we can be on anywhere of the spectrum. As an example, gene key 5, in its shadow frequency, so when we're in a low vibration, we might be manifesting this quality as impatience. As we rise in frequency and we become more aware, we can then transform that same quality to the gift of patience. And now when we're in this very high frequency or we rise higher, we then begin to emanate timelessness. That's the siddhic state. Now, timelessness goes beyond full human comprehension. Timelessness, what does it feel like to be timeless? What does that mean? We may find ourselves in states of timelessness when we're fully immersed in something we absolutely love, where all time seems to fall away. That's more of the higher spectrum of this essence. But full timelessness is something that perhaps most of us haven't touched on. It's not impossible to get to that point. However, we should be gentle with ourselves when looking at this transmission and looking at these keys, and not expect to get to the siddhic level of every essence. The gift level is such a gift within itself, the gift of patience. Now, that's just one example. There are many, many, many essences and qualities that are outlined in the 64 gene keys, and according to Richard Rudd, these are the building blocks of our reality. Interestingly enough, the gene keys directly relates to the I Ching, and this was used as an oracle thousands of years ago by Chinese emperors and government officials to make decisions. So the gene keys can be used as an oracle if one likes. You can, flick to any of the gene keys and contemplate them and see where it's coming up in your life or how it might be relevant to this time. However, the gene keys goes this one step beyond the I Ching, where it incorporates astrology. So according to the time and place of your birth, you have a specific chart which outlines 3 sequences. Now, making up these 3 sequences are 11 gene keys. And these are more prominent for you. These are more prominent in certain areas, and the sequences highlight what areas these might be in. For example, we have an activation sequence made up of 4 gene keys, and this is to do with our prime gifts, to do with us, ourselves, our individual purpose, our life's work, our evolution, our radiance. And then the sequence then comes into the Venus sequence, which is all to do with relationships and how we relate to others. And it's quite interesting because this sequence goes into our childhood, and certain spheres represent a different point in our upbringing. So it's interesting to look at what keys are in these spheres and take a look back to these areas of our childhood and see where this might be or might have taken place. If you were perhaps operating in a shadow frequency at that young age, if that emerged, and then how has that then shaped who you are today and who we are. So it's a really cool tool to sort of start making connections on your life and on you and how these might fit. The next sequence is the prosperity sequence, which is all to do with service and how we can be prosperous in this life, and not just financially, but abundantly bringing in what fulfills us. This is real prosperity. Real prosperity is a life of meaning, a life of service, a life of joy, our network, our community. So through these three sequences, when you start to work through them and then contemplate the gene keys, these essences, it is an absolutely phenomenal tool to dive deeper into yourself, deeper into where you might have blind spots. For example, the Venus sequence is an incredible tool to work with human relationships. From looking at that sequence and looking at some of my shadows, it's become so obvious where those shadows have been emerging in relationships. And it suddenly, I'm aware of them, and then I have this power to change them. Change the program, change the rhythm, change the, this unconscious maze that we can find ourselves in certain areas of our life. So it's a really beautiful tool for self-inquiry. And fascinatingly, like so many of these shadows, they can be so subtle. And until you start to become aware of them, you don't even notice them in your life. And then when you can transmute this shadow into a higher state of being, then other things start to open up and deeper connections can be made, and your heart starts to open further, and you let more life in, and you can interact with life in this completely more visceral, more emotional way, and not like an emotional tide that carries you all over the place, but just riding with it, riding and accepting and feeling and being, and then deciding and choosing, do I want to be a victim to this shadow or this subtle shadow, or do I want to rise out of it? Am I now aware that it's actually me who's bringing this in? So it's a beautiful way to look at your life and to look at where we are limiting ourselves and how we are unconsciously limiting. Richard Rudd talks about how the gene keys really do relate to our genetics, and through epigenetics it has been discovered that our environment can influence our DNA. And basically what this is this new way of thinking about our genetics, and how when we change our beliefs and we change our environment, how does that change then our DNA, our genes? And according to Richard Rudd, from looking at these shadows and changing our beliefs, we can actually change our genetic makeup. We can activate different codes, and these codes can emit great sources of light and can be great sources of service and joy, and these higher frequencies we are able to embody because we've turned that on. He talks about junk DNA and how 99.9%, something like this, don't quote me on it, of our DNA is junk, and how actually there's so much in there, and we can activate new parts and we can start to make these new connections. And he really talks about the gene keys as not only an individual working, but a collective human working, that some gene keys are, our whole human society is in the shadow state of it. So even as an individual, we might be up here on one gene key or one quality. As a collective, the human consciousness is still at its shadow. So it's like, unbreaking that and looking at how one person who can transmute the shadow into a gift can actually have this rippling effect on others, and it can actually start rippling through communities, and we can start awakening more and more people through our connections and our service. So it's really a bigger picture game here. There are also these things called lines. So you might have, say, for example, gene key 62 as your life's work, but you'll be a line 5. Now the lines add a whole other flavor or essence into the gene key. The lines differ depending on what sphere we're looking at. However, there is a general theme to the lines. I like to think of the lines like chakras. You can think of line 1 as the ground, the beginning, the new, Mother Earth bringing this energy up from nothing, or not from nothing, but from source and from earth. And then we can think of, say, line 6, which is where it goes to, as like the visionary. So our third eye chakra, which is all about vision and foresight and bringing something new that isn't yet manifested here on the physical plane. So we can look at the lines like chakras if we don't have the information or the books to really read in depth on what the lines mean. You can look at that general theme in any of your keys or your spheres and kind of contemplate that. However, there are so many free resources online that I'm sure that even if you are unable to buy the content, you can find so much without spending any money on this transmission. It's just a beautiful, beautiful transmission, and there's so many people talking about it and sharing information on it. It's absolutely transformed my way of interacting with the world, and it's rapidly accelerated my own personal growth and development. I'm saying rapidly. It's so good. It's such a good transmission. So there are lines, and essentially the best way to go about it is to not be too structured. Don't be too logical or analytical or forceful. It's really a feminine transmission. So it's about contemplation, it's about flow, it's about just contemplating a key and a sphere and the line. If you don't even want to go into the sphere or the line, just contemplate the key. And you might spend some time on just one key. You might come back to it. And how is this in my life? Where is this coming up? And things, surprisingly, I'm sure you'll find this, when you start looking at a key, you'll start seeing it in your life where this is. And you see where you're in your shadow and where you're in your gift, and how we kind of go up and down, and we just become better and more aware and quicker identifying when, oh, I'm in a low frequency. I'm in my shadow right now. Let's come out of it. Let's make that choice. Let's come out of it. Or let's sit in the shadow. Let's feel what it's like to be in the shadow. Let's just feel it, but not project the outside world. Let's just feel it. Let's see where it might be coming from. Let's really allow ourselves to be honest about what it is. And this is how we transmute. This is how we dissolve these lower frequencies from coming in and really dictating our life, dictating our behaviors, and keeping us locked in, keeping us boxed. And it really is, it just goes so deep, and there's so much to dive into, and it goes very deep. So I'm looking forward to making more videos on the keys. But just to finish this, a really good way to start is to get your free map by putting in your birthday and your place of birth, getting that map, and just starting at each sphere, going into the book and looking at that key, contemplating it. Don't even worry about the lines. Don't worry about what sequence it is. Just look at these keys, contemplate, allow things to come up, allow yourself to absorb this information. Let it just soak, like literally infuse into your body. It's this real absorption process. And then when you feel ready, you might want to dive deeper into the sequence, into the sphere, into the lines, and then go that little step further of contemplation. And just let it come when it comes. It might take you a year to go through your chart. You might rush through the chart in a month, but then go back and go slowly. That's how I did it. I was super excited about it. I went full in. Every gene key I wanted to know about the gene key. I was like, oh my God, I want to know. And contemplated and came to many realizations and conclusions, and then was fascinated to go in deeper. And now, you know, I might look at one key every few weeks and just sit on that key in that one sphere. You can also get books on all the different sequences, like the activation sequence, the Venus sequence, and the prosperity sequence, all have their own book, which goes in deep into what the spheres mean. If you don't want to get the books, you can also go on YouTube and find content there. But, you know, this is an excellent place to start. I would just dive into it. If it resonates with you, you'll feel it, and you will just, I think, inevitably go down the path of using the gene keys as a beautiful, beautiful tool for self-inquiry. If it doesn't resonate with you, I suggest don't force it. Don't force it. And one other thing, if you can't get around astrology and you can't really open yourself to that, because I know some people struggle with the concept of astrology and like destiny and this, you know, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. F that off. And just look at the gene keys, because we have all 64 of them are within us. It's within the fabric of reality. So actually all 64 gene keys are in our lives somewhere. It's the fabric of what makes up our human experience. So actually some of the coolest breakthroughs I've made or realizations have been through contemplating gene keys that aren't in my chart. But we all go through these shadows and these gifts and these, it's within all of us. So enjoy and dive in. And if you liked this video, please like and subscribe. It's my first video, and I'm planning on making many more, going more into depth on all of the keys and all of the spheres and all of the lines. So it may be a work in progress getting there, but here it is, number one. Have a beautiful day.